US elections are right around the corner, and if you moved overseas in the last few years, you may be wondering, how do I vote in the election? We'll be explaining it step by step in this video.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Expat. On this channel, we talk all things about living overseas as an expat. So whether that is voting in the election of your home country or making money online so you can travel full time, that's what we cover on this channel. So if it's something that you're interested in, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single video. And in terms of resources and things like that, you can find everything that we're going to be talking about, every course that we have available, every free resource, more videos in the description below. Speaking of courses, quick reminder, we are doing our Get Your First High Paying Client online bootcamp starting in November. Spots are selling. This is where we work with you for 4 weeks to help you get your first high paying client online so you can have a location independent business and either make more money if you're already living overseas or start a location independent business so you can more easily go overseas. Information for all of that is below.
Now, before we jump into talking about how to get your ballot as a US citizen abroad, we want to touch on a really important topic, which is we know that a lot of expats just don't feel the need to vote. The way they see it, leaving the US is their vote, or really their way of opting out of the system because they feel like the system is failing. I tend to come a little bit more from that camp myself. I'm certainly able to get a ballot here. I don't know if I'll be voting, at least not specifically in the presidential election, because if I'm being honest, aside from us wanting to be politically neutral here on this channel, I cannot really wholeheartedly put my vote or give my support on principle to either one of these candidates in this election right now, if I'm just being completely transparent and completely honest. There's certainly good and bad about each of them. I don't think that either one is necessarily the savior or the downfall of democracy. I think that the system is all sorts of messed up, and I don't think that any one candidate is going to save it. And so, in a lot of ways, on principle, I don't really feel compelled to vote for one or the other. And I'm sure you have a lot of things to say about that in the comments, but that's just where I stand.
And where you stand, I think, is where a lot of expats and people living abroad stand, because you're not the first expat who has said that. I tend to agree. I think one of the things that happens when you live overseas is because you're kind of removed. What was it that I said a few months ago when all
Not
this...
my circus, not my monkeys?
Not my circus, not my monkeys, because you're not there. But also, it's almost like when you live in another country, right, from your home country, you start seeing the politics going on in your home country from a different perspective. And a lot of expats are feeling like, I just don't want to participate in this insanity. This looks crazy. The elections are getting more and more dystopian the further along we go.
I'm not even very confident in the integrity of the election process in the US at all. I've seen what's happened in Venezuela and in other countries, and it looks in a lot of ways like we're headed towards that direction just from an electoral process. So I don't really believe that it matters all that much.
A lot of people also feel like the vote doesn't actually matter, especially when it comes to president and Congress, because as we've talked about on this channel before, people feel like they're paying taxes into a system, but they're not being represented by these people at all.
That sounds familiar from way back in the day, in the 1700s, when a nice group of people decided to throw some tea overboard. Y'all remember that? Cheers.
So I think the way that you feel is actually totally valid. I've heard it from a lot of different expats because you do start to see things from a very different perspective when you start to live in another country. Also, bringing in my history nerd here, if you look at what's going on in the United States right now and you compare it to fall of empires that have happened up until now.
In real life, we're not talking about the video game.
Yeah, in real life, right? So if we look at every empire that has fallen, the United States is currently at the final stage of the fall of an empire. Citizens are at each other's throats. There's more money going overseas
to fight wars,
just like in Rome. a lot of infighting within the country itself. It's just a lot of debt because of all the money going overseas and overspending and things like that. So a lot of expats, especially those who are history nerds and people who tend to travel a lot, tend to be a little bit of history nerds because they like to learn things typically. Also see what's going on in the United States and they're like, is it worth it at this point? Because neither of these two candidates are going to save anything. Some people think the country's too far gone.
Yeah, I tend to be in that camp as well, and I think that the U.S. will almost definitely make a comeback, whether it's to the number one kind of global economic position that it has been, or that it's been close to in the years past. I'm not sure, but I do think that after we hit a certain point. It might be a decade, it might be 2 decades, it might be a lot longer. I think the U.S. will start to make what's the word? Like a comeback, like a regaining of
renaissance?
their renaissance, I guess. Yeah.
Do you think it'll split up into different countries? Because that's what some people think.
Probably not. And we're getting a little off topic, but I think that it'll definitely make a comeback. There's going to be a renaissance. I don't know if it'll ever establish like that number one position again, but it's definitely going to get worse before it gets better, which is why one of the main reasons why we decided to leave, because we see the writing on the wall. And fortunately, we both have location independent businesses, so we can afford to do that, and we can do it in a way where it doesn't affect our income. If anything, we're making more money now living overseas, spending less, saving more, versus being in the U.S., where we are physically does not affect our income, except maybe in a positive way now because of this channel and some other things we're working on. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But back to the topic at hand of looking at the elections
and should you vote or not. So that's one viewpoint. I will add to the final viewpoint, a lot of expats feel like I'm not there, so I don't care. I voted with my feet and I voted with my money, which some could argue speaks a lot more volumes than sending in a ballot. So I think it's valid.
I would agree that does, because you are voting with your money, and that and your talent. I mean, those are the things that actually matter in a society. In most states, your vote, I mean, I hate to say it, but it literally doesn't matter at all. Like,
well, you're from California.
Yeah.
I'm from Florida, infamous swing state.
Right.
So, but you're from California, where we all know where California is going to go. And that's a whole other thing about the whole electoral college and that system, because we just went through elections here in Mexico. It's popular vote. We don't have to do mental gymnastics to figure out who the president is. And I have a concern. I'm just going to say this. I don't think it's going to be clear cut. We may not even know who the president is the first week or so. I think it's going to go to courts.
I think it's going to be a lot longer.
I think it's going to go to courts. That's what I think. Okay, so those are the arguments for a lot of expats on why they choose not to vote, which I think is fair. I think it's valid. I don't think people should be shaming you for that. You voted with your feet and you voted with your dollars. That speaks volumes, and I don't think anybody should be forced to vote into a system that they feel doesn't represent them.
Similar interests.
Similar to third-party candidates, because we both tend to be more in the third-party camp, and it's like, why am I being forced into this two-party system?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't represent, I would argue, most Americans.
Absolutely.
Why are we being forced into this? So I don't think anybody should be shamed for that. If voting your conscience means not voting, that's still voting your conscience. So I don't think anybody should be shamed for that. Now, let's talk about the reasons of why expats do choose to vote. And I would say the biggest one is probably, I'm not there, but I still have friends and family there who have to deal with this circus.
Yep.
And that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Even if you don't have friends or family back in the US or Canada or wherever else you're from, a lot of the things that happen in your home country still do affect you. If you've got a job there, if you've got clients there, if you're tied in any way, like in the US, you're paying taxes no matter where you are in the world. And we just did another video about Trump's plan on that for expats, so you can actually check that out as well. But that certainly is one reason. So having friends and family, being tied into the country or the government or the tax system, and it affecting you even if you're not living there, which is the case for almost all U.S. citizens.
Yeah, and I'd say those are probably the two biggest ones, because I would say even though you're physically removed, and I would say a lot of people are mentally checked out. I've seen a lot of expats say, I am mentally checked out of this political system. I am living my best life in another country. You are still tied to the U.S. tax system.
Oh, and the U.S. dollar.
And the
especially
U.S.
if your
dollar.
income is coming from the U.S. economy in dollars.
And the U.S. dollar. So those would be pretty big reasons to decide to vote in an election if you are overseas. I think both camps make very valid points. I have no judgment or opinion on what anybody decides to do. Now, for those of you who are like, okay, I am going to vote, here's what you have to do, because I just went through this process. So I can tell you guys. And the good news is it's actually very easy. Now, before getting into it though, I want to notice something that is very different with the United States than I've seen with some other countries when it comes to voting abroad. And I'm not saying every country in the world does this, but I grew up in Miami. And in Miami, you have people from all over Latin America and the Caribbean, some parts of Europe. And for example, if Colombia is having an election, the Colombians all line up at the Colombian embassy in Miami to go vote. Venezuela just had an election in Venezuela, and they all had to go to the consulate, whichever ones they allowed to go to the consulate. Mexico had an election earlier this year, and the Mexicans in the United States had to go to the consulates to vote. In the United States, you actually do not go to a consulate to go vote.
You can drop your ballots off at an embassy or at a consulate, but they do not really, at least from our understanding or from anything that we've seen here in Guadalajara, they don't have the ability to vote directly there. You have to actually fill out a paper ballot, and then in some cases they can help you get it back to the U.S.
So let's go into how to actually get registered, get a ballot, get your voter ID. So I was concerned that this wasn't going to work at all, just full disclosure, but I just went through it and I could be like, okay, it works. Whether or not my vote will get counted, I guess I have no control over that, but at least I got everything I needed in order to vote.
Well, your vote will be counted. Whether it matters is a different issue.
There you go.
Numerically, but there are actually ways to track it and make sure that your ballot does get through and all that.
That's a fair point. That's a better way of putting it. So what I ended up doing is I ended up going to a website called the Center for U.S. Voters Abroad. And I think I saw it on Facebook or on YouTube, because a lot of people were talking about how to get registered to vote when you're overseas. You go through a form, they ask you for your address at home, like where your residency is at home, what state you're registered in, county, all that kind of stuff. Then they ask you what your party is. In my case, I was changing my party affiliation to independent, so I had to get a new voter ID. I'll get to whether or not I got the voter ID in Mexico. And then they ask you for your address in the country that you're in right now. And that's basically it. That's all you have to do. They end up taking care of everything with the elections department of your county at home. So then what happens is you get a bunch of emails from these guys, which I'm actually very thankful for, and they're just kind of giving you updates. I got my physical voter registration in the mail in Mexico a couple of weeks later. I was shocked because Mexican mail is not
typically the most reliable.
Not typically the most reliable. So I was like, oh, I actually got my voter's registration. Maybe I'll get a ballot too. But no, you are not getting a physical ballot overseas.
Depending on the county, though. It depends on the state and the county. I think some do send it to you. In your case, I think they're going to let you do it by email.
Yeah.
That's why they gave you the ID.
But what's interesting is I used to vote absentee for Miami-Dade in the past, and there was no option to do it via email. They would send you a physical paper ballot. And I thought that's what they were going to do this time, but that's not what happened. So what ends up happening is then, they hand off everything to the elections department. Then you get an email from your elections department. So for example, I got one a few weeks ago from Miami-Dade County. Here's your ballot. And in the case of Miami-Dade County, I just haven't had time to go through it yet. You have to go through the ballot first. It looks like it's an online system of some kind. I think I'm going to have to print it out, and then they are going to tell me the multiple ways in which I can enviar. Why am I forgetting that word? Send. Happens all
Amanda's
the time.
forgetting her English.
I'm forgetting my English to send the ballot in. So overall, the process is pretty easy. And then the Center for U.S. Voters Abroad is constantly sending you emails, checking in on you. Did you get your ballot? And then you're like, I didn't get it. I did get it. Please help me. Where is it? You know, they help you a lot. And then they send emails about you can FedEx it, you can fax it, you can mail it. Some elections departments let you email it. That all depends on the elections department, but these guys have done a pretty good job of staying on top of things and making sure that voters abroad understand what the process is and trying to make it as easy as possible for them. So there you have it. That's all you really have to do. You just have to go to that link and input your information, and they kind of take care of the rest and keep an eye on your email.
Yep, and it's definitely a lot easier to do all of that now than it was even just a few years ago, because there's so many nonprofits like that one that are helping people that are living abroad get their voter ID and their ballots and everything else. So pretty cool that we have those resources now, and it's good to know that just because you're living outside of the US does not mean that you can't vote. So definitely do that if it's something that you feel inclined to do.
You definitely still have time to register as an American who is living abroad. So if you're interested in voting, make sure to follow the instructions in this video, and we will leave links and resources in the description below. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single video. Give it a like because it helps us with the algorithm gods, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.